The notification popped up on my phone while I was stirring pasta sauce for dinner. New message from Amanda Foster. Amanda was my husband David's secretary at the law firm. In the 3 years she'd worked for him, we'd exchanged maybe a dozen text messages, usually about scheduling conflicts or forgotten anniversary dinner reservations that David needed help remembering. So when I saw her name on my screen at 6:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, I was curious but not concerned. The message contained 4 photos with the caption, "Thought you'd want to see these from our amazing trip." I opened the first photo, expecting to see pictures from David's business conference in Chicago that he'd returned from the day before. Instead, I saw my husband of 12 years lounging by a crystal-clear pool in what was definitely not Chicago. He was shirtless, tanned, and holding a tropical drink with a little umbrella. The backdrop showed palm trees and white sand beaches. The second photo made my stomach drop. David and Amanda at a restaurant table, her hand resting on his arm, both of them laughing at something off-camera. She was wearing a flowing white sundress that I'd never seen before, and they looked comfortable. Intimate. The third photo was them on a beach at sunset, Amanda's head on David's shoulder, his arm wrapped around her waist. They were both in swimwear, and there was something about their body language that spoke of familiarity, of a relationship that went far beyond boss and secretary. The fourth photo was the one that made me set down my wooden spoon and grip the kitchen counter for support. It was a selfie taken from inside what was clearly a hotel room, Amanda in the foreground with a radiant smile, and in the background, David could be seen emerging from what appeared to be a bathroom, wearing nothing but a towel. My hands were shaking as I stared at the screen. David's business conference in Chicago had apparently been a romantic getaway to what looked like the Caribbean with his secretary. I screenshot all 4 photos, my mind racing. Then I noticed something that would have been funny if it weren't so devastating. Amanda had clearly meant to send these photos to someone else. The tone of the message, the casual assumption that the recipient would be happy to see their amazing trip, the kiss emoji. This wasn't meant for the wife. Amanda had just accidentally sent evidence of her affair with my husband directly to me. I stood in my kitchen, the smell of garlic and tomatoes filling the air, staring at photographic proof that my marriage was a lie. Part of me wanted to call David immediately, to scream at him, to demand explanations. Another part of me wanted to delete the photos and pretend I'd never seen them, but mostly, I felt an odd sense of clarity. For months, I'd been noticing small changes in David's behavior. He'd been more distant, more secretive about his phone, working late more often. I'd chalked it up to stress at the firm, to the pressures of partnership track, to anything except what it actually was. Now I knew. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Amanda. "OMG, I am so sorry. Those were meant for my sister. Please delete them. It was a work trip and we just happened to be at the same resort. Nothing inappropriate happened." I almost laughed at the desperation in her follow-up message. The photos told a very different story than her hasty explanation. I didn't respond to Amanda. Instead, I turned off the stove, covered the pasta sauce, and sat down at my kitchen table to think. David would be home in about an hour, expecting dinner and probably planning to tell me more lies about his challenging conference and how tired he was from all those important meetings. I had a choice to make about how to handle this revelation, and I had 60 minutes to decide. My first instinct was confrontation. To print out the photos, scatter them across our dining room table, and wait for David to walk in and see them. To watch his face as he realized his carefully constructed deception had crumbled because his mistress couldn't work her phone properly. But as I sat there, looking around the kitchen we'd renovated together 2 years ago, at the refrigerator covered with photos from our own vacations and anniversaries, I realized that confrontation would only give me temporary satisfaction. What I really wanted was justice, and justice required planning. I forwarded the photos to my personal email account, then saved them to cloud storage from 3 different accounts. If Amanda thought she could convince me to delete them, she was more naive than I'd given her credit for. Next, I opened my laptop and began documenting everything I could remember about David's recent behavior. The late nights, the mysterious phone calls, the business trips that now seemed suspiciously frequent. I created a timeline, noting dates and details that suddenly made sense in this new context. Then I did something that felt both calculated and necessary. I called my sister Rachel. "Kelly, what's wrong? You sound weird." "Rachel, I need you to do me a favor and I need you to not ask questions until I explain everything." "Okay, I need you to recommend a divorce attorney. The best one you know." There was silence on the other end of the line. Rachel worked in family law, though as a mediator rather than a litigator. She knew exactly what this request meant. "Kelly, what happened?" I told her about the photos, about Amanda's mistake, about the months of lies that suddenly made perfect sense. "Jesus, Kelly. I'm so sorry. How are you holding up?" "I'm angry, but I'm also relieved." I felt like I was going crazy for months, thinking I was being paranoid or oversensitive. Now I know I wasn't imagining things. What do you want to do? I want David to face consequences for his choices. I want Amanda to understand that her little mistake is going to cost them both more than they bargained for. And I want to protect myself financially and legally. Rachel was quiet for a moment. The best divorce attorney I know is Margaret Chen. She's tough, she's smart, and she doesn't mess around. I can call her tonight if you want. Do it. After I hung up with Rachel, I made myself a cup of tea and sat back down with my laptop. If David thought he could conduct an affair under my nose and get away with it, he was about to learn otherwise. I spent the next 30 minutes researching Amanda Foster. Social media profiles, LinkedIn, public records. I wanted to understand exactly who my husband had chosen to betray me with. What I found was interesting. Amanda was 28, 7 years younger than me and 15 years younger than David. She'd been working at the firm for 3 years, starting just 6 months after David made partner. According to her LinkedIn, she'd previously worked at 2 other law firms, staying at each for less than 2 years. Her Instagram account was private, but her Facebook wasn't. Scrolling through her photos, I found several that had been posted in the past few months showing her at expensive restaurants, wearing designer clothes, carrying handbags that cost more than most people's monthly rent, all of this on a secretary's salary. I was beginning to understand the full scope of David's deception. This wasn't just an affair, he'd been funding Amanda's lifestyle with our money. My phone rang. David. Hey babe, I'm running about 20 minutes late. Got caught up in a client call. How was your day? His voice sounded so normal, so casual. Like he hadn't just returned from a romantic vacation with another woman less than 24 hours ago. My day was fine, I said, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. How are you feeling? Still tired from the conference? Yeah, it was intense. Lots of late nights, early mornings. I'm looking forward to a quiet evening at home. The audacity was breathtaking. He was lying so smoothly, so confidently. I wondered how many times he'd done this before, how many business trips had actually been romantic getaways. Well, dinner's ready whenever you get here, I said. Drive safely. Love you, Cal. I hung up before I could say something I'd regret. The time for emotional reactions would come later. Right now, I needed to stay focused on protecting myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Amanda. Kelly, please call me. I really need to explain about those photos. I deleted the message without responding. 20 minutes later, I heard David's car in the driveway. I met him at the door with a smile, taking his briefcase and asking about his day just like I had thousands of times before. Smells great in here, he said, kissing my cheek. What are we having? Your favorite. Pasta with that tomato sauce you love. David went upstairs to change clothes, and I served dinner, pouring him a glass of wine and making small talk about my day at work, about our weekend plans, about everything except the 4 photographs that had blown up our marriage. So tell me about Chicago, I said as we ate. How did the conference go? David launched into a detailed story about keynote speakers and networking events, about the hotel restaurant and the colleague he'd run into from law school. He was a good storyteller, weaving in just enough specific details to make the lies believable. I nodded and asked follow-up questions, watching him elaborate on his fictional week while I wondered how long he'd been this comfortable with deception. Did you go anywhere fun after the sessions? I asked innocently. You know, unwind a little? Not really. Mostly just room service and early nights. You know how those things are, everyone's pretty exhausted by the end of the day. Right. Well, you look good. Nice tan for someone who spent the week in conference rooms. David paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. Oh, that. The hotel had a rooftop pool. I managed to get up there a couple of mornings before the session started. So quick with the explanations. So prepared. After dinner, David settled into his usual spot on the couch with his laptop, catching up on emails and preparing for the next day. I cleaned up the kitchen, loaded the dishwasher, and tried to process the surreal nature of the evening. My husband was sitting 10 feet away from me, acting completely normal. While I had photographic evidence of his infidelity saved in multiple locations and a consultation scheduled with a divorce attorney for the next day, around 10 p.m., David announced he was going to bed early. Still catching up from the time change, he said, kissing the top of my head as he passed my chair. I waited until I heard the shower running upstairs, then opened my laptop and began researching Texas divorce laws. Community property state. Adultery as grounds for divorce. Division of assets. Spousal support. I was still reading when my phone rang at 11:30 p.m. Amanda Foster. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. Kelly, I know it's late, but I really need to talk to you. Those photos, it's not what it looks like. David and I are not having an affair. We were both at the same resort for work reasons and we just happened to take some pictures together. I know how it must seem, but I swear to you, nothing inappropriate is happening between us. Please call me back so I can explain everything properly." The desperation in her voice was palpable. Amanda was realizing that her accidental text had potentially destroyed not just her affair, but her job, her lifestyle, and any future she'd imagined with David. I saved the voicemail and went to bed, where David was already asleep, snoring softly. On his side of the bed that suddenly felt enormous. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the conversation I would have with Margaret Chen in the morning, about the life I was about to dismantle, about the future I would have to rebuild, but mostly, I thought about Amanda's mistake and how one accidentally sent text message was about to change 3 lives forever. Sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. The next morning, David left for work at his usual time, kissing me goodbye and reminding me about dinner plans we had with his parents that weekend. The normalcy of it all felt like performance art. "Have a great day, honey," I said, handing him his coffee. "Oh, and David? Tell Amanda I said thank you." "Thank you for what?" "Just for taking such good care of you during your trip." David looked puzzled but nodded. "Sure, I'll let her know." After he left, I called in sick to work and drove to Margaret Chen's office. Rachel had managed to get me an emergency consultation, and I arrived with my laptop, printouts of the photos, and a timeline of David's suspicious behavior over the past 6 months. Margaret was exactly what Rachel had promised: sharp, direct, and unimpressed by the dramatics of infidelity cases. "Mrs. Patterson, I've seen a lot of cheating spouses, but I have to say, this level of carelessness is unusual," she said, studying the photos. "Your husband's secretary essentially handed you a gift-wrapped case. What are my options? In Texas, we have both no-fault and fault-based divorce. Given this evidence, we can file on grounds of adultery, which may impact property division and spousal support. The fact that he's been spending marital assets on this woman strengthens your position considerably." Margaret explained the process, the likely timeline, and the financial realities I was facing. David made significantly more money than I did. But we'd been married long enough that I was entitled to a substantial portion of our assets. "I want to recommend something, though," Margaret said. "Don't confront your husband yet. Give me a week to prepare. Let's document everything we can about his financial activities, get copies of all important documents, and build the strongest possible case before he knows what's coming." "What about Amanda? What about her?" "I want her to face consequences, too." Margaret smiled grimly. "Trust me, Mrs. Patterson. When this comes out at the law firm, her career will face consequences. But let's focus on protecting your interests first." I spent the rest of the day following Margaret's instructions. I photographed important documents, gathered bank statements, and created detailed records of our assets. I also did something Margaret hadn't suggested. I started documenting everything I could find about David and Amanda's relationship, email patterns on his work laptop, which he'd left logged in, credit card charges that suddenly made sense, hotel bookings for business trips that coincidentally occurred in the same cities where Amanda had posted vacation photos on social media. The deeper I dug, the more extensive their deception became. This had been going on for at least 8 months, possibly longer. David had been living a double life with a sophistication that was both impressive and infuriating. That evening, David came home in an unusually good mood. "Great day at the office," he announced, pouring himself a scotch. "The Morrison case is moving forward exactly as we hoped, and I think we're going to land that new corporate client I've been courting." "That's wonderful. How's Amanda working out? Still happy with her performance?" David paused, glass halfway to his lips. "Amanda? Yeah, she's been great. Very dedicated. Always willing to go the extra mile." "I'm sure she is." The next few days followed a similar pattern. David continued his normal routine while I systematically gathered evidence and prepared for legal proceedings. He seemed completely unaware that anything had changed, which spoke to either remarkable confidence or complete obliviousness. Margaret had advised me not to alter my behavior too dramatically, so I maintained our usual routines. I cooked dinner, made small talk, even initiated physical intimacy once to maintain the facade. It felt like acting in a play where only I knew the script. On Thursday, Amanda called again. This time I answered. "Kelly, thank God you picked up. I've been so worried." "Amanda, there's no need to worry about anything. But those photos were very enlightening. Thank you for sending them." There was a long pause. "Kelly, I think you're misunderstanding what you saw." "Am I?" "Let me describe what I saw, and you tell me where I'm misunderstanding. I saw my husband at a tropical resort that he told me was a business conference in Chicago. I saw you with your hand on his arm. At a romantic dinner. I saw you with your head on his shoulder on a beach at sunset. And I saw you taking a selfie in a hotel room while my husband was coming out of the bathroom in a towel. We weren't, Amanda, you're 28 years old. You're not stupid. And neither am I. Kelly, please. You have to understand. David and I never meant for this to happen. We tried to fight it, but we have this connection. I hung up, the audacity was stunning. She was actually going to try to sell me some romantic narrative about their connection, and how they never meant for this to happen. Friday afternoon, Margaret called with an update. Kelly, I've been reviewing the financial records you provided. And I think we need to accelerate our timeline. Your husband has been moving money around in ways that suggest he might be preparing for something. There's a good chance he's consulting with his own attorney. How is that possible? He has no idea I know anything. Think about it. His secretary accidentally sent affair photos to his wife. She's probably told him about your phone conversation. They know their secret is out. I felt a chill of realization. Of course Amanda had told David about our conversation. They were probably in full panic mode, trying to figure out how to manage the situation. What do you recommend? We move now. I'm filing the divorce papers on Monday morning. This weekend, you need to secure your personal belongings, make copies of any remaining important documents, and prepare for David to be served at his office Monday afternoon. Margaret, there's something else I want to do. What's that? I want to make sure David's law firm knows exactly what kind of employee they have in Amanda Foster. Kelly, I understand the impulse for revenge, but this isn't revenge. It's accountability. David's firm represents family law clients. They have wives and husbands trusting them during divorces and custody battles. Don't you think those clients deserve to know if their attorney support staff is comfortable helping destroy marriages? Margaret was quiet for a moment. What did you have in mind? I want to send those photos to the managing partner. That's nuclear. Are you sure you want to go that far? Margaret, my husband has been lying to me for months. He's been spending our money on his mistress. He's been coming home to me after romantic weekends with another woman and pretending to be a loving husband. If I don't go nuclear, what message does that send about the consequences of that behavior? All right. But let's be strategic about it. Let me handle the communication with the law firm. That way it's coming from your attorney rather than looking like an angry wife seeking revenge. That weekend was surreal. David was home, working in his study and watching football, completely normal. We went to dinner with his parents on Saturday night, and I sat through 2 hours of conversation about David's career success and our wonderful marriage, while knowing that by Monday afternoon, everything would be different. Sunday evening, David's phone rang during dinner. He glanced at it, frowned, and declined the call. Work? I asked. Yeah, Amanda. Probably something that can wait until Monday. It rang again 5 minutes later. This time David answered, stepping into the hallway. I could hear his voice, but not the words. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes, and when he returned, he looked troubled. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, just some complications with the Morrison case. Nothing major. But David was distracted. For the rest of the evening, checking his phone frequently and responding to text messages. I suspected Amanda was updating him on her panic level and their need to coordinate their stories. Monday morning, David left for work early. Big day today, he said, kissing me goodbye. Might be home late. I'll be here, I said. At 9 a.m., Margaret filed the divorce papers. At 11 a.m., she sent a formal letter to the managing partner of David's law firm, including the photos Amanda had accidentally sent me and a detailed explanation of how they documented an extramarital affair between a partner and his secretary. At 2 p.m., David was served with divorce papers in his office. At 2:15 p.m., David called me. I let it go to voicemail. At 2:30 p.m., Amanda was called into the managing partner's office. At 3 p.m., David called again. This time I answered. Kelly, what the fuck is going on? I just got served with divorce papers at my office. Hello, David. How was your day? Don't play games with me. What is this about? I think you know exactly what it's about. Kelly, if this is about those photos Amanda sent you by mistake, oh, so you do know about the photos. Interesting. She told me about the mix-up. But Kelly, you have to understand, there's a completely innocent explanation. David, I'm going to stop you right there. I've spent the past week documenting your affair. I have financial records showing you've been spending our money on Amanda. I have evidence of multiple trips you took together. I have photos of you two in situations that no married man should be in with his secretary. Kelly, please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain. I know you've been cheating on me for months. I know you've been lying to me consistently. I know you've been funding your mistress's lifestyle with marital assets. And as of this afternoon, your law firm knows all of this too. There was silence on the other end of the line. Kelly, you sent those photos to my office? My attorney sent them to your managing partner with a full explanation of what they document. I thought your firm should know what kind of people they employ. Jesus Christ, Kelly. Do you have any idea what you've done? You've ruined my career. No, David. You ruined your career when you decided to have an affair with your secretary. I just made sure there were consequences for that decision. We need to talk. I'm coming home. No, you're not. I've changed the locks. Your belongings are packed and waiting in the garage. You can't lock me out of my own house. Actually, I can. My attorney filed for exclusive use of the marital residence. Check with your lawyer. I hung up and immediately called Margaret. How did it go? She asked. About as well as expected. He's angry, he's blaming me for ruining his career, and he wants to come home to talk. Classic cheater response. Anger, blame shifting, and attempts to regain control. Don't engage with him directly anymore. All communication goes through attorneys from now on. What happens next? David will hire a lawyer, probably someone from outside his firm given the circumstances. We'll start discovery, negotiate property division, and work toward a settlement. Given the evidence we have, I expect this to be resolved fairly quickly. And Amanda? I suspect Amanda is having a very different kind of Monday than she expected. That afternoon, I got a call from my sister Rachel. Kelly, oh my God, the legal community is buzzing. Word is that David Patterson got served with divorce papers at his office, and there's some kind of scandal involving him and his secretary. News travels fast. Honey, are you okay? This must be devastating. You know what, Rachel? I'm better than okay. For the first time in months, I feel like I'm in control of my own life. That evening, David showed up at the house despite my instructions. I watched through the front window as he tried his key, then started banging on the door. Kelly, open the door. We need to talk about this. I called the police. 20 minutes later, 2 officers escorted David off the property and explained that he could be arrested for trespassing if he returned without permission. Ma'am, one of the officers said to me, do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight? Sometimes these situations escalate. I'll be fine, but thank you for asking. After they left, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in my living room, surrounded by silence and the absence of David's belongings. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Amanda. Please call me. We need to talk about David. I deleted the message. The next morning, Margaret called with an update that made me smile. Kelly, I heard from a colleague who works at David's firm. Amanda Foster was terminated yesterday afternoon. Apparently, the managing partner was not pleased to learn that a secretary was using company resources to conduct an affair with a partner. What about David? He's been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. The firm is concerned about liability issues and damage to their reputation. So he might lose his job too. It's possible. Law firms take ethics violations seriously, especially when they involve relationships between partners and staff members. Over the next few weeks, the full consequences of Amanda's accidental text message became clear. David was forced to resign from his law firm after the internal investigation concluded that his relationship with Amanda had created a hostile work environment and exposed the firm to potential liability. Several clients requested to transfer their cases to other attorneys when the scandal became public. Amanda, meanwhile, was having difficulty finding new employment. Word had spread through the legal community about her affair with a married partner. And law firms were reluctant to hire someone with that kind of reputation. David hired an attorney and tried to fight the divorce proceedings, but the evidence was overwhelming. The photos, the financial records, the documented lies, all of it painted a clear picture of adultery and financial misconduct. Your husband's attorney approached me about a settlement, Margaret told me during one of our meetings. David is willing to agree to a 60-40 split of assets in your favor in exchange for avoiding a trial. What do you think? I think we can do better. The evidence we have suggests a pattern of financial deception that goes beyond just spending money on his affair. I found evidence that David was planning to move significant assets offshore, possibly in preparation for divorce proceedings. He was planning to leave me. It looks that way. The timeline suggests he was preparing an exit strategy while continuing the affair. The revelation that David had been planning to leave me while pretending everything was normal added another layer of betrayal to an already devastating situation. But it also strengthened my legal position considerably. Margaret was right, we could do better than 60-40.3 months after Amanda's accidental text message. David and I reached a final settlement. I received 70% of our marital assets, including the house, and David was required to pay substantial spousal support for 5 years. The day after the settlement was finalized, I received an unexpected visitor. Amanda Foster stood on my doorstep, looking significantly different than she had in those vacation photos. Her designer clothes had been replaced with discount store attire, and she looked exhausted. "Kelly, I know you probably don't want to see me, but I needed to apologize in person." "Amanda, there's really nothing you can say that I need to hear. Please, just give me 5 minutes. I need you to understand what really happened." Against my better judgment, I let her into my living room. "Kelly, I want you to know that I never intended for any of this to happen. When I started working for David, it was just a job. But he was going through a difficult time, and we started talking, and one thing led to another." "Amanda, David wasn't going through a difficult time. We had a good marriage, or at least I thought we did." "That's not what he told me. He said you two had grown apart, that you barely spoke anymore, that he was planning to ask for a divorce anyway." I stared at her, realizing that David had fed her the same lies that cheating spouses had been telling their mistresses for centuries. "Amanda, David never mentioned wanting a divorce to me. We were making plans for the future. We were talking about having children." Amanda's face crumpled. "He told me you didn't want children. He said that was one of the main problems in your marriage." "David knew I wanted children. We'd been trying for over a year." The truth hit Amanda like a physical blow. She sank into my couch, tears streaming down her face. "Oh God, Kelly. He lied to me about everything, didn't he? What do you think?" I thought he was this lonely, misunderstood man who was trapped in a loveless marriage. I thought I was saving him." "Amanda, you were sleeping with someone else's husband and helping him spend marital assets on your lifestyle. There's no version of that story where you're the hero." I know that now. Kelly, I've lost everything. My job, my apartment, my reputation. No one in the legal field will hire me. I'm moving back in with my parents in Oklahoma." I felt a moment of sympathy for her, but it passed quickly. "Amanda, you made choices. You chose to believe David's lies because they made it easier to justify what you were doing. You chose to accept expensive gifts and vacations that you knew he couldn't afford on his salary alone. You chose to send those photos to what you thought was a friend, bragging about your affair." "I know. You're right. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Thank you for saying that." After Amanda left, I sat in my living room thinking about the strange journey that had started with 4 accidentally sent photos. Her mistake had revealed not just David's infidelity, but his plans to leave me, his financial deception, and his willingness to lie to both his wife and his mistress to get what he wanted. In a weird way, Amanda's texting error had saved me from years of additional deception and possibly a much worse financial outcome if David had succeeded in moving assets offshore before filing for divorce. 6 months later, I ran into David at a coffee shop downtown. He looked tired and older, wearing a suit that had seen better days. "Kelly," he said, approaching my table cautiously. "How are you?" "I'm well, David. You?" "I'm managing. I started my own practice. It's small, but it's something." "That's good. Kelly, I want you to know that I'm sorry. About everything. About the lying, the cheating, the way I handled things. I made terrible choices, and I hurt you in ways I can never make right." I studied his face, looking for signs of sincerity or manipulation. What I saw was a man who had lost everything and was finally beginning to understand the true cost of his actions. "David, I appreciate the apology. I hope you've learned something from this experience." "I have. More than I ever wanted to learn." "What happened with Amanda?" David's expression darkened. "Amanda and I, that ended badly. It turns out that when you build a relationship on lies and deception, it doesn't survive when the truth comes out. She told me you lied to her about our marriage." "I did. I told her what I thought she needed to hear to justify what we were doing. But the truth is, Kelly, you were a good wife. You deserved better than what I gave you." It was the most honest thing David had said to me in years. Yes, I did deserve better. As I drove home from that encounter, I reflected on how much my life had changed since that Tuesday evening when Amanda's photos had appeared on my phone. The betrayal had been devastating, but the aftermath had been liberating. I was living alone. For the first time in my adult life, making decisions based solely on my own preferences and goals. I'd started dating again and had met someone kind and honest who treated me with the respect I'd forgotten I deserved. Most importantly, I'd learned that I was stronger and more capable than I'd ever imagined. The woman who had stirred pasta sauce while her world crumbled had rebuilt that world into something better. A year after the divorce was finalized, I received a wedding invitation in the mail. It was from my attorney, Margaret Chen, who was marrying Her longtime partner in a ceremony that would be attended by many of the people she'd helped through difficult divorces. At the reception, Margaret pulled me aside. "Kelly, I wanted to thank you." "Thank me for what?" "For reminding me why I do this work. Your case was one of the most satisfying I've ever handled, not because of the financial outcome, but because you refused to be a victim. You took control of your situation and demanded accountability. I had a good attorney. You had good instincts. You knew that justice required action, not just anger." As I drove home from the wedding, I thought about Amanda Foster's text message one more time. Her big mistake had indeed been big, but not in the way she'd meant. Her mistake hadn't been accidentally sending affair photos to the wrong person. Her mistake had been getting involved with a married man in the first place, believing his lies, and thinking there would be no consequences for helping to destroy someone else's marriage. The photos were just the evidence. The mistake was much deeper than that, but sometimes, other people's mistakes become our opportunities. Amanda's error in judgment had given me the information I needed to protect myself and demand accountability from people who had betrayed my trust. In the end, her big mistake had been exactly what I needed to build a better life, and as I pulled into the driveway of the house that was now solely mine, filled with furniture I'd chosen and photos that reflected my actual life rather than a performance for social media, I realized that sometimes the best revenge really is living well. Amanda Foster had accidentally given me the gift of truth, and I'd used that gift to create something better than anything David had ever taken away from me. Her mistake had become my opportunity, and I'd made the most of it. 2 years after the divorce, I was living a life I couldn't have imagined during those dark days of stirring pasta sauce while my world collapsed. I'd been promoted to senior project manager at the marketing firm where I worked, bought a smaller but more charming house in a trendy part of town, and was in a relationship with someone who actually deserved my trust. His name was Michael Torres, and I'd met him at a cooking class I'd taken as part of my Rebuild Kelly's Life initiative. He was a widower, a high school history teacher whose wife had died of cancer 3 years earlier. Unlike David, Michael had no interest in playing games or keeping secrets. He was refreshingly direct, genuinely kind, and had a teenage daughter, who was initially suspicious of me but had gradually warmed up. "You know," Michael said one evening as we cooked dinner together in my kitchen, "I never thought I'd feel grateful to someone's cheating ex-husband, but David really did you a favor by being such an obvious disaster." "How do you figure?" "If he'd been subtle about his affair, you might have stayed married to him for years, wondering why you felt disconnected but never knowing why. Instead, his secretary's texting incompetence gave you a clean break and solid evidence. No years of couples therapy trying to work through communication issues that were actually infidelity issues." Michael had a point. Amanda's accidental revelation had been like ripping off a band-aid quickly rather than slowly peeling it away over months or years of growing suspicion and doubt. "Plus," Michael continued, "if you'd stayed married to David, you never would have taken that cooking class where you met this devastatingly handsome history teacher." "Devastatingly handsome? That's a bit much." "Hey, my students voted me most likely to have been attractive in the 1990s in the yearbook last year. That's basically the same thing." This was what I'd been missing with David, someone who could make me laugh, who was comfortable with himself, who didn't need to boost his ego by diminishing others. But just as I was settling into this new contentment, the past decided to resurface in an unexpected way. It started with a phone call from Margaret Chen. "Kelly, I have some interesting news about your ex-husband." "I'm not sure I want to hear David news, Margaret." "Trust me, you'll want to hear this. David's being investigated by the state bar for ethics violations." I set down my coffee cup. "What kind of ethics violations?" "It seems that David's pattern of financial deception extended beyond his personal life. The state bar received complaints from 3 former clients alleging that David misappropriated funds from their settlements. He was stealing from clients. That's what they're investigating. Apparently, David would settle cases for more than he told his clients, then pocket the difference. One case involved a personal injury settlement where David told his client they'd received $150,000 when the actual settlement was $200,000. Jesus. How did they figure it out? One of the clients happened to know someone at the insurance company who mentioned the actual settlement amount. When the client confronted David, he initially tried to claim there were additional fees and costs, but the client hired another attorney to review the case. So David could be disbarred? Very likely. And Kelly, there's more. The investigation has revealed that David was using Amanda to help him with some of these schemes. She had access to client files and settlement documents. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. Vindication because David's pattern of deception had finally caught up with him in a way that couldn't be explained away or settled quietly. Sadness because I realized how completely I'd misjudged the man I'd married. What does this mean for Amanda? She's facing potential criminal charges. Accessory to fraud, possibly more. It turns out that her expensive lifestyle wasn't just funded by David's marital assets, she was also getting kickbacks from the client funds he was stealing. 3 weeks later, the story hit the local legal newspaper. Former partner at prestigious law firm faces disbarment for client fund theft. The article detailed David's schemes and mentioned Amanda as a co-conspirator who had been terminated from her position for conduct incompatible with professional standards. I was reading the article over breakfast when my phone rang. Unknown number. Kelly? This is Amanda Foster. Please don't hang up. I almost did hang up, but curiosity got the better of me. What do you want, Amanda? I'm calling from jail. I've been arrested. I saw the news. Kelly, I need to ask you something, and I know I have no right to ask anything of you. You're right, you don't. I know David lied to me about your marriage. But I need to know, did you know about the client money? Did you know David was stealing from his cases? The question caught me off guard. No, Amanda, I had no idea David was stealing from clients. I didn't even know he was stealing from our marriage until you accidentally sent me those photos. So you never saw any suspicious deposits or large cash transactions? Amanda, are you trying to figure out if I can be implicated in this somehow? No. God, no. It's just, my attorney says the prosecution is trying to prove that this was a long-running conspiracy involving multiple people. They're looking at everyone who had access to David's finances. Well, I didn't have access to his business finances. We kept our work accounts separate. Kelly, I'm so sorry. Not just for the affair, but for all of this. I got involved with David thinking he was this successful, ethical attorney, and instead I helped him steal money from people who trusted him. Amanda, you made a choice to get involved with a married man and to participate in financial schemes that you had to know were wrong. I'm sorry you're facing consequences, but those consequences are the result of your decisions. I know. I wanted you to know that I never intended for any of this to happen. Amanda, here's the thing about intentions, they matter less than actions. You intended to have a glamorous affair with a successful man, but your actions helped steal money from people who were already suffering from injuries or other legal problems. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen thinking about the strange journey that had started with those vacation photos. What had initially seemed like a simple case of marital infidelity had turned out to be part of a larger pattern of deception and theft. I called Michael and told him about Amanda's call. So your ex-husband is not just a cheater, but an actual criminal? Apparently so. How do you feel about that? It was a good question. How did I feel about learning that the man I'd been married to for 12 years was not just unfaithful but actively stealing from vulnerable clients? Honestly? Relieved. Relieved? For months after the divorce, I kept wondering if I'd been too harsh. If maybe David really had been going through some kind of midlife crisis and the affair was just a mistake rather than a character flaw. Now, I know that the affair was just the tip of the iceberg. You feel vindicated. I feel like I trusted my instincts correctly. When Amanda sent those photos, I didn't just react emotionally, I documented everything, protected myself legally, and demanded accountability. It turns out that was exactly the right response because David's problems went much deeper than cheating. That afternoon, I got a call from Rachel. Kelly, have you seen the news about David? Margaret told me about the investigation, and Amanda called me from jail. Amanda called you? What did she want? I think she's trying to figure out if anyone else is going to be implicated in David's schemes. Well, she might want to worry about herself. I heard from someone at the courthouse that the district attorney is considering charging her as a co-conspirator rather than just an accessory. What's the difference? Co-conspirator suggests she was an active participant in planning the fraud, not just someone who helped after the fact. It carries much harsher penalties. 6 months later, I was in my office when my assistant knocked on my door. Kelly, there's someone here to see you. She says her name is Lisa Williams and that she needs to speak with you about David Patterson. I was confused until the woman walked into my office. She was in her mid-40s, professionally dressed, and looked vaguely familiar. Miss Patterson, sorry, Miss Kelly, I'm Lisa Williams. I was one of David's clients. It took me a moment to place her, but then I remembered, Lisa Williams had been involved in a personal injury case that David had handled about 2 years ago. I'd met her briefly at a firm holiday party. Lisa, I'm sorry, but I can't discuss David's legal cases. You should speak with, I'm not here about my case specifically. I'm here because I wanted to thank you. Thank me? If you hadn't exposed David's affair, he never would have been investigated for the client fund theft. I would never have known that he stole money from my settlement. Lisa sat down across from my desk, and I could see tears in her eyes. Miss Kelly, my case was from a car accident that left me with permanent nerve damage. I can't work full-time anymore, and I was counting on that settlement money to help support my family. When David told me the settlement was $75,000, I was disappointed but grateful for something. What was the actual settlement? $125,000. David stole $50,000 from my family. The magnitude of David's theft was staggering. This wasn't just abstract financial misconduct, he was stealing money from people who were already suffering, already struggling. Lisa, I'm so sorry. That's horrible. The thing is, I probably never would have found out if the state bar investigation hadn't started. And that investigation only started because David's personal life fell apart after you exposed his affair. So you got your money back? The state bar's victim compensation fund paid out the difference, and David's malpractice insurance covered the rest. But more importantly, he can't do this to anyone else. Lisa reached into her purse and pulled out a newspaper clipping. I wanted to show you this. It was an article from yesterday's paper, former attorney sentenced to 4 years in prison for client fund theft. David was sentenced yesterday. 4 years in state prison, and he's been permanently disbarred. I stared at the article, trying to process that the man I'd once planned to have children with was now a convicted felon. What about Amanda? She got 2 years in probation. Her attorney argued that she was manipulated by David, but the judge said she was old enough to know that stealing client funds was wrong regardless of her relationship with her boss. After Lisa left, I called Michael to tell him about David's sentencing. 4 years seems like a lot for financial crimes, he said. Margaret told me that the judge was particularly harsh because David violated the trust relationship between attorney and client. Plus, he showed no remorse and tried to blame Amanda for everything. So he's still not taking responsibility for his choices. Apparently not. That evening, Michael and I were having dinner when his daughter Sophia asked me a question that caught me off guard. Kelly, can I ask you something personal? Sophia was 16, smart, and had inherited her father's directness. She'd been initially skeptical of me, understandably protective of her father after losing her mother, but we'd developed a good relationship over the past year. Sure, Sophia. Do you ever think about what would have happened if David's secretary hadn't sent you those photos by mistake? It was a question I'd been avoiding thinking about too deeply. What do you mean? I mean, if she hadn't screwed up, you might still be married to him. You might never have found out about the affair or the stealing. You might have spent years married to someone who was lying to you about everything. Michael and I exchanged glances. Sophia had a point that was both insightful and disturbing. Sophia, that's a really thoughtful question. And honestly, it's terrifying to think about. Do you think David would have eventually left you for Amanda? I don't know. Based on what I learned during the divorce proceedings, David was planning to move money offshore, possibly in preparation for leaving me. But he also seemed to enjoy having both a wife and a mistress. That's so gross. Yes, it is. But here's what I don't understand, Sophia continued. Amanda's mistake seems almost too convenient. Like, who accidentally sends vacation photos with their married boyfriend to his wife? Michael looked up from his plate. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything specific. It just seems like a really big coincidence that Amanda's mistake happened to expose everything right when David was preparing to hide money and possibly leave anyway. I hadn't considered this possibility, but Sophia's question made me think. Had Amanda's text really been an accident? Sophia, are you suggesting that Amanda sent those photos on purpose? I don't know. But think about it, if Amanda was starting to figure out that David was using her for more than just an affair, if she was realizing that he was involved in illegal stuff that could get her in trouble, maybe she wanted out but didn't know how to get out safely. So she sent the photos to me as a way to blow up the whole situation? It's possible. I mean, if she was worried that David might try to blame her for the client fund theft, exposing the affair would force everything into the open where lawyers and investigators would look at all of it. Michael set down his fork. Sophia, that's a very sophisticated theory for a 16-year-old. Dad, I watch a lot of true crime shows. People do complicated things when they're scared. That night, I lay awake thinking about Sophia's theory. Had Amanda's mistake really been deliberate? Looking back, her follow-up messages had seemed panicked, but that could have been an act designed to cover her real intentions. The next morning, I called Margaret Chen. Margaret, I have a theoretical question about Amanda Foster. Okay. Is it possible that she sent those photos to me on purpose? Margaret was quiet for a long moment. That's an interesting theory. What makes you think that? I told her about Sophia's observations and my own growing suspicions. You know, Kelly, something about Amanda's story never quite added up to me. She claimed it was an accident, but she was smart enough to help David with complex financial schemes. It seems unlikely that someone that careful would make such a careless mistake. So you think she did it on purpose? I think it's possible. And if she did, it was actually a smart move on her part. How so? Think about it. If Amanda was starting to realize that David's schemes could expose her to serious criminal liability, she needed a way to separate herself from him without making it obvious that she was trying to protect herself. Exposing the affair created chaos that allowed her to claim she was a victim rather than a co-conspirator. But she still got arrested and charged. Yes, but as an accessory rather than as a co-conspirator. And she got 2 years instead of the 5 to 10 she might have faced if prosecutors had viewed her as an equal partner in the schemes. I thought about this theory for weeks. If Amanda had deliberately sent those photos, it meant she'd sacrificed her affair and her job to avoid more serious criminal consequences. It would also mean that she'd been more calculating and strategic than I'd given her credit. 4.3 months later, I got my answer in the most unexpected way. I was grocery shopping when I ran into someone I hadn't seen since the divorce proceedings, David's former law partner, Robert Harrison. Robert had been one of the few people at the firm who'd been genuinely kind to me during my marriage to David. Kelly, how are you? You look great. Thank you, Robert. How have you been? Good, good. Listen, I'm glad I ran into you. I wanted to apologize for not reaching out after everything happened with David. The whole situation was just shocking. Robert, you don't need to apologize. None of that was your fault. Still, I should have called. But I wanted you to know that the firm has implemented new policies about relationships between partners and staff specifically because of what happened. That's good to hear. Kelly, can I ask you something? And please feel free to tell me it's none of my business. Sure. Do you think Amanda Foster planned the whole thing? My heart skipped. What do you mean? I mean, do you think she deliberately exposed the affair to get ahead of the criminal investigation? Why would you think that? Robert looked around the grocery store, then leaned closer. About 6 months before those photos got sent to you, Amanda came to me privately. She said she was concerned about some irregularities in David's client account management. I stared at him. She reported David to you? Not exactly. She said she'd noticed some discrepancies but wasn't sure if they were mistakes or something more serious. She asked me what she should do if she suspected a partner was mishandling client funds. What did you tell her? I told her she had an ethical obligation to report suspected misconduct, but I also warned her that making accusations against a partner could end her career if she was wrong. So she knew about David's theft before she sent me those photos? It seems likely. And, Kelly, here's the thing, Amanda was smart. She had to know that if she reported David directly, she'd be viewed as a co-conspirator trying to save herself. But if the information came out through a different route, through a divorce investigation. Exactly. A divorce attorney investigating marital assets might discover financial irregularities that would then be reported to the appropriate authorities. I felt like I was seeing the whole situation from a completely new angle. If Robert was right, Amanda hadn't been the naive secretary seduced by her charming boss. She'd been a calculating woman who'd realized she was involved with a criminal and had engineered a way to expose him while minimizing her own liability. Robert, why are you telling me this? Because I think you deserve to know the whole truth. And because I'm impressed by how Amanda handled a difficult situation. She protected you, herself, and David's future victims by making sure his crimes were exposed. She protected me. Kelly, if Amanda hadn't sent those photos, David might have succeeded in moving marital assets offshore before filing for divorce. You might have ended up with much less in the settlement, and David's victims might never have gotten their money back. Driving home from the grocery store, I called Michael and told him about my conversation with Robert. So Amanda was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers, he said. It seems like it. How do you feel about that? Honestly? Impressed. And grateful. Grateful? If Amanda hadn't acted when she did, I might have spent years more married to a man who was not only cheating on me but actively stealing from vulnerable clients. Her decision to expose everything protected me from becoming an unwitting accomplice to his crimes. Do you think you'll ever talk to her again? I don't know. Part of me wants to thank her for what she did. Another part of me is still angry about the affair, regardless of her motives for ending it. 6 months later, I got a letter forwarded from my old address. The return address showed it was from a federal correctional institution in Texas, but this time, it wasn't from David, dear Kelly. I know this letter will probably surprise you, and I understand if you choose not to read it. I'm writing from federal prison, where I'm serving my sentence for my role in David's financial crimes. I want to be completely honest with you about something I wasn't honest about before. I didn't send those vacation photos to you by accident. By the time we took that trip, I had discovered that David was stealing money from his clients. I'd seen settlement documents that didn't match what he was telling clients they'd received. I realized that my access to those files made me a co-conspirator in federal crimes. I was scared and didn't know how to get out of the situation without destroying my own life. David had made it clear that if I ever crossed him, he would make sure I faced serious consequences, but I also couldn't stand by and watch him continue stealing from people who trusted him. Some of his clients were elderly, disabled, or struggling financially. They needed that money. So I came up with a plan. I knew that if I reported David directly, he would claim I was lying to save myself. But if the information came out through a divorce investigation, it would be discovered by neutral parties who had no reason to protect either of us. I sent those photos to you because I knew you were smart enough and strong enough to investigate further. I knew you would document everything and hire a good attorney. I knew that exposing David's personal misconduct would lead to scrutiny of his professional conduct. I want you to know that I am genuinely sorry for the affair. You didn't deserve to be betrayed by your husband, and you didn't deserve to have your marriage destroyed by our selfishness. But I'm not sorry for exposing David's crimes, even though it meant destroying my own life in the process. The reason I'm telling you this now is that I want you to understand that you were never just a victim in this situation, you were an instrument of justice. Your response to my accidental text message led to David being held accountable for years of theft and prevented him from stealing from future clients. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I hope you can find some peace in knowing that your strength and determination protected other people from becoming David's victims. I also want you to know that I followed your advice about using my remaining time constructively. I've been working in the prison's legal aid clinic, helping other inmates with their cases. It's the first honest work I've done in years. I hope you've built a good life for yourself. You deserve happiness and honesty, things I helped take away from you but that I hope you found again. Sincerely, Amanda Foster. I read the letter 3 times, processing the confirmation of everything I'd suspected since my conversation with Robert Harrison. Amanda had orchestrated the entire revelation, using me as an unwitting agent to expose David's crimes while protecting herself from being viewed as the primary whistleblower. It was manipulative, calculating, and probably the most effective way she could have handled an impossible situation. That evening, I showed the letter to Michael and Sophia. Wow, Sophia said after reading it. I was right about it not being an accident, but I didn't think it through as thoroughly as she did. How do you feel about being manipulated like that? Michael asked. You know what? I'm not sure I was manipulated. Amanda gave me information I needed to protect myself. Yes, she had her own motives, but the outcome was that justice was served and David's victims were protected. So you're not angry? I'm angry about the affair. I'm angry that David lied to me for months. But I'm not angry about Amanda's decision to expose those lies, even if she did it for self-serving reasons. Are you going to write back to her? I thought about it for several days. Finally, I decided I would. Amanda, thank you for telling me the truth about the photos. I suspected they weren't sent accidentally, but I appreciate having that confirmed. You're right that I was strong enough to handle the information you gave me. But I want you to understand that my strength came from having been deceived and betrayed, not from any natural resilience. Your affair with my husband taught me that I couldn't trust the people closest to me to tell me the truth. That was a painful lesson, but it was also a valuable one. It taught me to verify rather than assume, to document rather than hope, and to demand accountability rather than accept excuses. I'm glad David's crimes were exposed and that his victims received compensation. I'm glad you're using your time in prison constructively. And I'm glad that your decision to blow up your own life prevented David from destroying more lives. I hope when you're released, you find a way to build something honest and meaningful. I won't say I forgive you for the affair, that's not something I'm required to do for your peace of mind. But I can say that I understand why you made the choices you made, and I respect the courage it took to expose David even when it meant destroying your own situation. Kelly, after I mailed the letter, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The woman who had accidentally sent me vacation photos, except it wasn't really an accident, had ultimately given me the information I needed to protect myself and others. Her motives had been self-serving, but her actions had served justice. A year later, Michael proposed to me during a cooking class, the same type of class where we'd met. Sophia helped him plan the proposal, and when I said yes, she hugged me and whispered, "I'm glad Dad found someone who knows how to handle cheating men." Sophia, your dad isn't a cheating man. I know. But if he ever became one, I'm confident you'd handle it appropriately. At our wedding 6 months later, Margaretchen gave a toast that made me laugh and cry at the same time, to Kelly, who proved that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you gives you the information you need to build the best thing that could happen to you. As Michael and I danced to our first song as husband and wife, I thought about the strange journey that had started with 4 accidentally on purpose photos from my ex-husband's manipulative mistress. Amanda's mistake had led to David's downfall, her own imprisonment, my divorce, and ultimately to this moment, dancing with a man who was honest, kind, and completely trustworthy. Sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places, delivered by the most unlikely messengers, and sometimes the biggest mistake someone makes is actually the smartest thing they could have done, not just for themselves, but for everyone involved. Amanda Foster had made many mistakes, but deliberately sending me those photos wasn't one of them. It was the first honest thing she'd done in months, and it had saved more people than she probably realized, including me. 3 years into my marriage with Michael, I thought the David Patterson chapter of my life was permanently closed. I was wrong. It was a Saturday morning in October when my doorbell rang unexpectedly. Michael was at Sophia's soccer game, and I was enjoying a rare quiet morning with coffee and a book. Through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, mid-30s, professionally dressed, holding what appeared to be a manila folder. "Mrs. Torres? My name is Catherine Mills. I'm an investigative journalist with the Austin Chronicle. I'm working on a story about your ex-husband, and I was hoping you might be willing to speak with me." My stomach dropped. "Ms. Mills, David was sentenced years ago. What more could there possibly be to write about?" "Mrs. Torres, we've discovered evidence that David's crimes were much more extensive than what came out during his trial. We believe there may be dozens of additional victims across multiple states." I opened the door, more out of curiosity than willingness to cooperate. "What kind of evidence?" Catherine opened her folder and showed me a spreadsheet with hundreds of entries, names, dates, dollar amounts. "We've been investigating a network of attorneys across Texas, Oklahoma, and New Mexico who were sharing client information and coordinating settlement fraud. David appears to have been not just a participant, but potentially the person who organized the entire operation." I stared at the documents, trying to process what Catherine was telling me. "You're saying David wasn't just stealing from his own clients, he was running some kind of organized fraud ring?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. And Mrs. Torres, we have reason to believe that Amanda Foster wasn't just his accomplice in these crimes, she was his key to expanding the operation to other law firms." Catherine pulled out another document, this one showing Amanda's employment history. Amanda didn't just work at David's firm. Over the past 5 years, she worked at 4 different law firms across 3 states, staying at each for 12 to 18 months. At each firm, she had access to client files and settlement information. "You think she was placed at these firms intentionally?" "We think David was using Amanda to identify potential targets and gather information that would allow him to approach attorneys at other firms about joining his fraud network." I sank into my kitchen chair, overwhelmed by the implications of what Catherine was suggesting. "How much money are we talking about?" Conservative estimates suggest the network stole over $2 million from client settlements across the 4 firms where Amanda worked. "But Mrs. Torres, that's not why I'm here." "What do you mean?" "We've discovered that Amanda Foster was released from federal prison 6 months ago. She's been visiting the victims of David's original crimes, the ones that were exposed after your divorce." My blood ran cold. "What kind of visits?" "She's been approaching David's former clients and offering to help them file additional civil suits. She claims to have information about hidden assets that weren't recovered during the original restitution process." "Is she trying to help them or scam them?" "That's what we're trying to figure out. Some of the victims say Amanda seems genuinely remorseful and helpful. Others think she's running some kind of new con." Catherine leaned forward in her chair. "Mrs. Torres, Amanda has been telling these victims that she has information about David's crimes that never came out during the trial. Information that could help them recover additional money. But she's asking them to pay her a consultation fee up front." "How much?" $5,000 per victim. I felt sick. If Catherine was right, Amanda had served her time and was now immediately returning to a life of crime, this time targeting people who had already been victimized by her previous schemes with David. "What do you want from me?" "We want to know if Amanda has contacted you. And if she does, we'd like you to consider cooperating with an investigation." "What kind of investigation?" "The kind that involves wearing a wire and recording conversations." After Catherine left, I sat in my kitchen for an hour, staring at the business card she'd given me. The phone number for Detective Maria Santos, Austin Police Department, Financial Crimes Division. When Michael and Sophia returned from the soccer game, I told them about Catherine's visit. So Amanda is out of prison and potentially running new scams on David's old victims? Michael asked. That's what it sounds like. Sophia, now 19 and home from college for the weekend, had a different perspective. But what if Amanda really does have information that could help those people? What if she's legitimately trying to make amends by helping them recover more money? Sophia, she's charging them $5,000 up front. That doesn't sound like making amends. Maybe she needs the money to survive. Ex-cons don't exactly have great job prospects. Michael and I exchanged glances. Sophia's optimism about human nature was both endearing and occasionally naive. Sophia, people who are genuinely trying to make amends don't charge their victims money for the privilege, I said gently. But what if the information is really valuable? What if she can actually help them get money back that they wouldn't otherwise be able to recover? It was a fair question. If Amanda genuinely possessed information that could help David's victims recover additional funds, was it necessarily wrong for her to charge for that information? That night, I called Margaret Chen to get her perspective. Kelly, this is exactly the kind of thing I'd expect from someone like Amanda Foster, Margaret said. She's not stupid. She knows that David's victims are vulnerable and potentially desperate for any chance to recover more money. But is it possible she has legitimate information? It's possible. David was clearly involved in more extensive criminal activity than what came out during your divorce. But Kelly, think about this logically. If Amanda had information that could help David's victims, why didn't she provide it during the criminal investigation? Why wait until she's out of prison and needs money? Margaret had a point. If Amanda's information was legitimate and she was genuinely trying to help, she could have provided it to prosecutors or victim advocates years ago. Margaret, the journalist wants me to cooperate with a police investigation if Amanda contacts me. Are you willing to do that? I don't know. Part of me thinks Amanda has faced enough consequences for her actions. Another part of me thinks that if she's really targeting David's victims again, she needs to be stopped. Kelly, those victims trusted David once and got burned. If they're being targeted again by Amanda, they're being victimized twice. That's not justice, that's predatory behavior. 2 weeks later, I got my answer about Amanda's intentions in the form of an unexpected phone call. Kelly? This is Amanda Foster. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I have something important to tell you. My heart started racing. Catherine Mills had prepared me for this possibility, but I still felt unprepared. Amanda, I thought you were in prison. I was released 6 months ago. Kelly, I'm calling because I've discovered information about David that I think you need to know. What kind of information? Information about hidden assets that weren't found during your divorce. Money that David stole and hid before he was arrested. Amanda, if you had information about hidden assets, why didn't you tell the authorities years ago? Because I didn't know about it then. I've spent the last 3 years in prison learning about financial investigation techniques from other inmates. I know how to trace money flows that I didn't know how to trace before. It was a plausible explanation, but something about Amanda's tone felt rehearsed. What kind of hidden assets? David opened accounts in the Cayman Islands using shell corporations. He moved over $300,000 there before he was arrested. Money that should have been included in your divorce settlement. My pulse quickened. $300,000 was not a trivial amount. Amanda, why are you telling me this? Because you deserved better than what happened to you. And because I want to make amends. For my role in David's crimes. What do you want in return? I need help with the investigation costs. Tracing international financial records requires paying for specialized database access and sometimes hiring local investigators in the Cayman Islands. I'm asking for $5,000 upfront to cover those costs. There it was. The same fee structure Catherine had described. Amanda, $5,000 is a lot of money. I know it is. But Kelly, if I'm right about these hidden assets, you could recover more than 50 times that amount. And I'm willing to put our agreement in writing. If I don't find evidence of hidden assets within 90 days, I'll refund your money. It was a sophisticated pitch, much more polished than what I would have expected from someone who had just been released from federal prison. Amanda, I need to think about this. Of course. But Kelly, there are statutes of limitations on some of these financial recovery actions. If we wait too long, you might lose the ability to recover this money permanently. After I hung up, I immediately called Detective Santos. Mrs. Torres, thank you for calling. We've been hoping Amanda would contact you. She just did. She's offering to help me recover hidden assets from my ex-husband for $5,000 upfront. That's exactly the same pitch she's made to 7 other victims. Mrs. Torres, we'd like you to meet with Amanda and record the conversation. What are you hoping to prove? We believe Amanda is running a variation of an advance fee fraud. She takes money upfront promising to recover hidden assets, then provides fabricated evidence that the assets exist but are tied up in legal proceedings that require additional fees. So the assets don't actually exist? We don't think so. Our investigation suggests that David's assets were thoroughly investigated during the original criminal case. If there were hidden Cayman Islands accounts, they would have been discovered. But what if Amanda is telling the truth? Mrs. Torres, that's why we need you to meet with her. If she has legitimate information, she should be able to provide specific account numbers, bank names, and documentation. If she's running a scam, she'll be vague about details and pressure you to pay quickly. The next day, I met with Detective Santos and Catherine Mills to discuss the plan. We want you to arrange a face-to-face meeting with Amanda, Detective Santos explained. Tell her you're interested but want to see the evidence before you pay anything. What if she refuses to meet in person? Then we'll know she's running a scam. Legitimate asset recovery requires detailed documentation that's best reviewed in person. And if she agrees to meet? You'll wear a wire, and we'll have backup nearby. We want to give Amanda every opportunity to prove that her offer is legitimate. I called Amanda that afternoon. Amanda, I'm interested in learning more about these hidden assets, but I want to see the evidence before I commit to anything. Kelly, I understand your caution. I'd feel the same way in your position. Can we meet in person so you can show me what you found? There was a pause. Kelly, most of my evidence is in digital form. I could email you some preliminary findings. I'd prefer to meet face to face. If you're asking me for $5,000, I want to see everything you have. Of course. Where would you like to meet? We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown the following afternoon. I spent the morning being fitted with a recording device and reviewing the questions Detective Santos wanted me to ask. The key is to get Amanda to be specific, Detective Santos explained. Ask for bank names, account numbers, dates of transactions. If she has legitimate information, she should be able to provide those details. When I arrived at the coffee shop, Amanda was already there, sitting at a corner table with a laptop bag and a folder of documents. She looked different than I remembered, thinner, more tired, but also more focused. Kelly, thank you for meeting with me. I know this must be difficult. It's fine, Amanda. Show me what you found. Amanda opened her laptop and displayed what appeared to be a sophisticated financial investigation report. I've traced David's transactions through multiple banks, and I've identified 3 accounts in the Cayman Islands that contain approximately $320,000. She showed me screenshots of what appeared to be bank records, corporate registration documents for shell companies, and wire transfer receipts. Amanda, these documents look very professional. How did you get access to Cayman Islands bank records? I hired a local investigator who specializes in asset recovery. It cost me almost everything I had saved, but I wanted to help David's victims recover what they're owed. Can you give me the specific account numbers and bank names? Amanda hesitated. Kelly, I need to be careful about how I share that information. If David finds out that his hidden accounts have been discovered, he might be able to move the money before we can recover it. David is in federal prison. How could he move money? He could have accomplices on the outside. Other people who were involved in his financial schemes. It was a plausible explanation, but I could see why Detective Santos was suspicious. Amanda was being vague about the specific details that would allow independent verification of her claims. Amanda, if these accounts really exist, why haven't you reported them to the FBI or the Victim Compensation Fund? I tried, Kelly. But the FBI agent I spoke with said they couldn't investigate based on privately obtained foreign bank records. They said the information would need to come through official channels. So you're trying to recover the money privately? It's the only option. Kelly, the legal system failed David's victims once. I'm trying to make sure it doesn't fail them again. Amanda pulled out a contract and placed it on the table between us. This agreement guarantees that if I can't provide evidence of recoverable assets within 90 days, you get your money back. Plus, I'm willing to take my fee as a percentage of recovered assets rather than upfront payment. I studied the contract. It looked legitimate, and the terms seemed fair. Amanda, what percentage would you take? 20% of recovered assets. So if we recover $300,000, I would receive $60,000 and you would receive $240,000. That's a substantial fee. It's standard for asset recovery services. And Kelly, it means I only get paid if you get paid. The offer was compelling, and Amanda's presentation had been much more sophisticated than I'd expected. But I could hear Detective Santos's voice in my head, reminding me to ask for specific details. Amanda, Can you show me the exact bank statements that prove these accounts exist? Kelly, I don't have the actual bank statements. What I have are investigative reports that identify the accounts and estimate their balances. So you haven't actually seen proof that the money is there? Not directly, no. But my investigator is very experienced, and his track record is excellent. Can I speak with your investigator directly? Amanda looked uncomfortable. He's based in the Cayman Islands, and he's very protective of his client relationships. He generally doesn't speak directly with the ultimate beneficiaries. Every answer Amanda gave sounded reasonable in isolation, but collectively they painted a picture of someone who had impressive-looking documents but no hard proof of actual recoverable assets. Amanda, I need to think about this more. Can I keep copies of these reports? I'd prefer not to leave hard copies. If David's accomplices found out that his hidden accounts had been discovered, could you email me digital copies? Kelly, these reports contain sensitive financial information. I'm not comfortable transmitting them electronically where they could be intercepted. I was starting to understand why Detective Santos was suspicious. Amanda had an explanation for every concern I raised, but none of her explanations allowed for independent verification of her claims. Amanda, I appreciate the work you've done, but I'm not comfortable moving forward without being able to verify the information independently. Amanda's demeanor shifted slightly. Kelly, I understand your hesitation, but we need to move quickly. Asset recovery cases have strict time limits, and if we wait too long, the accounts could be moved or frozen. How long do I have to decide? Ideally, I'd like to start the formal recovery process within the next week. After our meeting, I debriefed with Detective Santos and Catherine Mills. She had explanations for everything, I told them, but none of the explanations allowed me to verify that the assets actually exist. That's exactly what we expected, Detective Santos said. Amanda is running a sophisticated advance fee fraud. She creates the appearance of legitimate asset recovery services, but she never provides proof that recoverable assets actually exist. So the Cayman Islands accounts are fake? We believe so. Or if they exist, they don't contain recoverable assets. What happens now? Now we wait to see if Amanda contacts you again. If she does, we'd like you to tell her you're ready to move forward, but you want to meet with her investigator first. Why? Because the investigator probably doesn't exist. If we can get Amanda to admit that she's been fabricating evidence, we'll have grounds for fraud charges. 3 days later, Amanda called me again. Kelly, have you had a chance to think about the asset recovery proposal? I have, and I'm interested in moving forward. But I want to speak with your investigator in the Cayman Islands first. There was a long pause. Kelly, as I mentioned, he generally doesn't speak directly with clients. Then I'm not interested in proceeding. Kelly, please don't let procedural issues prevent you from recovering money that's rightfully yours. Amanda, if there really is $300,000 in hidden accounts, then verifying that those accounts exist shouldn't be a procedural issue. You're right. Let me contact my investigator and see if he's willing to make an exception. Amanda never called back. 2 weeks later, Detective Santos informed me that Amanda had been arrested for advance fee fraud. She had approached 12 of David's former victims with the same asset recovery pitch, and had collected over $40,000 in upfront fees. Mrs. Torres, Amanda was using the money she collected from victims to create increasingly sophisticated fake documents. She was planning to expand the operation to target victims of other financial crimes. So there never were any hidden assets? No. Our investigation confirmed that David's assets were thoroughly investigated during the original criminal case. There was no hidden money to recover. At Amanda's sentencing hearing 6 months later, I was shocked to learn the full scope of her post-prison criminal activity. She had not only targeted David's victims, but had also created fake asset recovery companies in 3 other states. She had stolen over $200,000 from people who were already struggling with the financial aftermath of various fraud schemes. Ms. Foster, the judge said during sentencing, you have shown a complete inability to learn from your previous incarceration. Rather than using your release as an opportunity to build an honest life, you immediately returned to targeting vulnerable victims. Amanda was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, with no possibility of early release. After the hearing, I was approached by several of David's former victims who had been targeted by Amanda's asset recovery scam. Mrs. Torres, one of them, said, "Thank you for helping the police catch her. If you hadn't cooperated with the investigation, she would have stolen money from all of us. I'm just glad we were able to stop her before she caused more damage." Mrs. Torres, can I ask you something? Do you think Amanda ever felt genuine remorse for what she did to you and David's other victims? It was a question I'd been thinking about since Amanda's arrest. I think Amanda felt remorse about getting caught and facing consequences. But I don't think she ever truly understood the impact of her actions on other people. That evening, Michael and I discussed the case over dinner. So Amanda spent 3 years in federal prison, got released, and immediately started running new scams on the same people she had previously victimized. That's exactly what happened. Kelly, do you think she planned this while she was in prison? Do you think the whole learning financial investigation techniques from other inmates story was preparation for this scam? It was a disturbing thought, but probably accurate. I think Amanda is someone who sees other people as resources to be exploited. When she was David's secretary, she exploited her access to client information. When she was having an affair with David, she exploited his willingness to fund her lifestyle. When she went to prison, she probably saw it as an opportunity to learn new criminal techniques. And when she got out, she immediately started exploiting David's victims again. Right. Amanda doesn't seem capable of viewing other people as anything other than potential targets. Sophia, now a junior in college majoring in criminal justice, had a different perspective when she came home for spring break. Mom, I've been studying recidivism rates in my criminology classes. What Amanda did isn't unusual for people who commit financial crimes. What do you mean? Financial criminals have some of the highest recidivism rates of any category of offender. They typically see crime as a career choice rather than a moral failing. So Amanda was always going to return to crime after her release? Probably. Especially since she'd never held a legitimate job that paid as well as her criminal activities. Sophia pulled out a textbook and showed me statistics on white-collar crime recidivism. Look at this, over 60% of financial criminals are arrested for new crimes within 3 years of release. And the crimes are typically more sophisticated than their original offenses. More sophisticated how? They use what they learned in prison and their knowledge of law enforcement techniques to develop better criminal schemes. It was a sobering realization. Amanda hadn't accidentally sent me those vacation photos as a moment of conscience or even as a calculated move to expose David's crimes. She had probably viewed the entire situation as a learning experience that would help her run better scams in the future. Sophia, do you think Amanda planned to target David's victims from the beginning? I think Amanda planned to return to financial crime from the day she was arrested. The specific victims probably varied based on opportunity, but she was always going to target people who had money and reason to trust her. Reason to trust her? Think about it, Mom. David's victims knew that Amanda had been instrumental in exposing his crimes. They had reason to believe she might have additional information that could help them. She was exploiting the goodwill she'd earned by cooperating with the original investigation. The more I learned about Amanda's post-release activities, the more I realized how naively I'd viewed her original confession letter from prison. Amanda hadn't written that letter because she felt genuine remorse. She had written it to establish a relationship with me that she could exploit later. Her accidental text message hadn't been either accidental or a calculated move to expose David's crimes. It had been a test run for future criminal schemes. Point 6. Months after Amanda's second sentencing, I received a call from Catherine Mills. Kelly, I wanted to let you know that the Chronicle is publishing a comprehensive investigation into David and Amanda's criminal network. What did you find? The fraud operation was much larger than anyone realized. We identified connections to attorneys in 7 states and estimated total victim losses of over $5 million. $5 million? David wasn't just stealing from individual clients. He was part of a network that was manipulating mass tort settlements, class action distributions, and insurance payouts. How did they get away with it for so long? The crimes were spread across multiple jurisdictions, and the individual losses were small enough that they didn't trigger federal investigation thresholds. It was only after your divorce exposed David's personal financial crimes that investigators started looking at the broader pattern. Catherine's investigation revealed that Amanda had been much more than David's accomplice. She had been the coordinator for a criminal network that spanned multiple states and involved dozens of attorneys and support staff. Kelly, Amanda wasn't just helping David steal from his clients. She was traveling to other law firms, identifying potential criminal partners, and helping them set up their own theft operations. So when she moved from firm to firm, she was recruiting new criminals? Exactly. And she was taking a percentage of stolen funds from each firm she helped corrupt. How much money did Amanda personally steal? Conservative estimates suggest she personally received over $800,000 from the network's activities. The revelation that Amanda had been the mastermind behind a multi-state criminal enterprise rather than David's naive accomplice completely changed my understanding of everything that had happened. Amanda hadn't been seduced by David into participating in financial crimes. She had likely recruited David into a criminal network that she was already operating. Catherine, does this mean that Amanda targeted David rather than the other way around? It's possible. Amanda's employment at David's firm coincided with a significant increase in the sophistication of his financial crimes. So she might have specifically sought out successful attorneys who were vulnerable to recruitment. That's our theory. David was making good money but spending beyond his means. He had the kind of financial pressure that makes people susceptible to get-rich-quick schemes. A week later, I received one final call from Detective Santos. Mrs. Torres, I wanted to let you know that Amanda Foster has been indicted on federal racketeering charges related to the criminal network. What does that mean for her sentence? If convicted, she's looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. The racketeering charges carry much harsher penalties than simple fraud. Will she actually serve that much time? Very likely. Amanda is being classified as a career criminal now, which means she's not eligible for early release programs. Detective Santos, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think Amanda sent me those vacation photos as part of some larger plan? Detective Santos was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Torres, based on what we've learned about Amanda's criminal sophistication, I don't think she did anything accidentally. If she sent you those photos, it was because she believed it would somehow benefit her. But how could destroying her relationship with David and exposing his crimes benefit her? Maybe she knew the network was about to be discovered anyway. Maybe she was planning to testify against other network members in exchange for leniency. Maybe she was preparing to start her own operation and needed to eliminate David as competition. Or maybe she was setting up David to take the fall for crimes that were primarily her responsibility. That's also possible. 3 years later, I was invited to speak at a conference for victims of financial crimes. The organizers wanted me to discuss how Amanda's accidental text message had led to the exposure of a major criminal network. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of people who had been victimized by various financial scams, I reflected on the strange journey that had started with 4 vacation photos. When I first received those photos, I told the audience, I thought I was discovering a simple case of marital infidelity. I had no idea that I was uncovering evidence of a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. But here's what I learned. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you gives you the information you need to protect yourself and others from even worse things. Amanda Foster sent me those photos as part of some larger criminal plan that I'll probably never fully understand. But regardless of her motives, those photos gave me the evidence I needed to protect myself financially and legally. More importantly, they gave law enforcement the starting point they needed to investigate crimes that had been hidden for years. After my presentation, I was approached by a woman in her 60s who introduced herself as Margaret Walsh, one of David's former clients. Mrs. Torres, I wanted to thank you personally. If you hadn't exposed David's affair, I never would have known that he'd stolen money from my settlement. How much did you recover? $42,000. Money I thought I'd never see again. Margaret handed me a photo of herself with her grandchildren. That money paid for my granddaughter's college tuition. She's graduating next month with a degree in criminal justice. She says she wants to help catch people like David and Amanda. Looking at the photo, I realized that Amanda's mistake had created ripple effects that continued to spread years later. Her failed attempt to manipulate me had led to the exposure of crimes, the recovery of stolen money, and apparently the inspiration for a new generation of law enforcement professionals, standing in the conference lobby, surrounded by people whose lives had been touched by financial crime. I thought about the strange justice of it all. Amanda Foster had spent years planning and executing sophisticated criminal schemes. She had manipulated victims, corrupted professionals, and stolen millions of dollars, but in the end, her downfall had come from underestimating the intelligence and determination of the people she victimized. She had sent me those photos believing I would be an easy target, a naive wife who would either ignore the evidence or react emotionally without thinking strategically. Instead, I had documented everything, hired excellent legal representation, and cooperated with law enforcement investigations that ultimately exposed crimes far beyond what Amanda had intended to reveal. Her big mistake hadn't been sending the photos to the wrong person. Her big mistake had been assuming that her victims would remain victims instead of becoming advocates for justice, and that mistake had cost her not just her freedom, but her entire criminal enterprise. Sometimes the people who think they're the smartest ones in the room turn out to be the ones who understand the least about the people around them. Amanda Foster had learned that lesson the hard way, and justice, however delayed and complicated, had ultimately been served. As I drove home from the conference, I thought about calling Michael to tell him about Margaret Walsh and her granddaughter. But then I decided to wait until dinner. After all these years, I had learned to savor the good moments instead of rushing through them. Amanda Foster's mistake had taught me many things. But perhaps the most important was that life's unexpected turns, even the most devastating ones, could ultimately lead to places more beautiful than anything you had originally planned, and that was a lesson worth sharing over a home-cooked meal with people who actually deserved my trust. The woman who had once stirred pasta sauce while her world crumbled had learned to cook for people who would never dream of taking credit for her recipes, and that, more than any legal victory or financial recovery, was the sweetest justice of all. 5 years later, on a crisp autumn evening, I was preparing dinner in the kitchen of the home Michael and I had bought together when my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it. Mrs. Torres? This is Sarah Chen from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Division. My heart skipped. Agent Chen, is everything all right? Yes, ma'am. I'm calling because Amanda Foster died in federal prison yesterday. Natural causes, a heart attack. But before she died, she left something for you. I sank into a kitchen chair, processing this unexpected news. What kind of something? A letter, along with detailed records of the criminal network she helped organize. She also left instructions for the FBI to establish a victim restitution fund using money recovered from various offshore accounts. Offshore accounts? Mrs. Torres, it appears that Amanda had been hiding money in foreign accounts throughout her criminal career. She left detailed information about these accounts with instructions that all recovered funds should go to victims of financial crimes. Agent Chen paused. Ma'am, the recovered amount is substantial. Over $1.2 million. That evening, I sat with Michael and Sophia, now 24 and working as a victim advocate, reading Amanda's final letter. Kelly, if you're reading this, I'm dead, and maybe that's for the best. I've spent my entire adult life hurting people, and I finally understand that I was never going to stop. I'm leaving this letter because I want you to know the complete truth about everything that happened. You deserve that much. I did send those vacation photos on purpose. But not for the reasons I told you before. I sent them because I was planning to kill David. I had discovered that David was planning to eliminate me as a witness to his crimes. He had already killed one person, a private investigator who had gotten too close to discovering the network. I found evidence of that murder among David's files. I realized that David would eventually kill me too, probably make it look like an accident or suicide. So I decided to strike first, but I'm not a killer, Kelly. I'm a thief and a manipulator, but I couldn't bring myself to actually murder someone. So instead, I destroyed David's life in a way that would protect me while ensuring he faced consequences for his crimes. I sent you those photos because I knew you were smart enough and strong enough to bring down everything David had built. I knew that exposing his affair would lead to investigations that would uncover his criminal activities. Most importantly, I knew that if David was in federal prison, he couldn't kill me. You saved my life, Kelly, even though you didn't know it. And you saved the lives of everyone else David might have murdered to protect his secrets. I spent 5 years in prison thinking about the choices I made and the people I hurt. I realized that I had spent my whole life seeing other people as either resources to exploit or threats to eliminate. I never learned how to see people as just people. I'm leaving you this money not because it will undo the damage I caused, but because I want to do one honest thing before I die. Use it to help other people who have been victimized by financial crimes. Help them the way you weren't able to help yourself when David was stealing from you. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it, but I want you to know that your strength and intelligence prevented more crimes than you'll ever know. Thank you for being someone worth becoming better for, even though I never managed to actually become better. Amanda, I set the letter down, my hands shaking slightly. She was going to kill David? Sophia asked. Apparently she thought David was going to kill her first, Michael said, rereading portions of the letter. So those photos, they weren't about the affair at all. They were about survival, I said quietly. We sat in silence for several minutes, processing this final revelation about a case that had defined so much of my adult life. Kelly, Michael said finally, how do you feel about this? Relieved, actually. Relieved? For years, I've wondered if I was too harsh in how I handled David's affair. If maybe there was some way to save our marriage or respond with more forgiveness. And now I know that David wasn't just a cheating husband. He was a murderer who might have eventually killed me too if I'd stayed married to him. Sophia leaned forward. Mom, do you think Amanda was telling the truth about David killing someone? I think Amanda was a lot of things, but she wasn't a liar. When it came to serious crimes, she manipulated people and stole money, but she documented everything meticulously. 3 months later, the FBI confirmed that Amanda's information had led to the discovery of evidence linking David to the murder of private investigator Thomas Rodriguez, who had been found dead in an apparent suicide 2 years before David's Arrest: David was charged with first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mrs. Torres, Agent Chin called to inform me, David confessed to the murder when presented with Amanda's evidence. He also confirmed that he had been planning to kill Amanda before she exposed the affair. So Amanda saved her own life by destroying David's marriage? And she probably saved yours too. David's pattern suggests he would have eliminated anyone who posed a threat to his criminal operation. The victim restitution fund established with Amanda's hidden assets ultimately helped over 200 people recover money stolen through various financial crimes. Sophia left her job to manage the fund, turning it into a national resource for financial crime victims. You know what's strange? Sophia said during one of our family dinners 6 months later. Amanda Foster spent her whole life hurting people, but her final act helped more people than most people help in their entire lives. Redemption is complicated, Michael replied. Amanda can't undo the damage she caused, but she at least tried to balance the scales before she died. Do you think she really changed at the end? Sophia asked me. I think Amanda finally understood the consequences of her actions. Whether that constitutes genuine change or just enlightened self-interest, I'm not sure it matters. What do you mean? The people who benefited from the restitution fund don't need Amanda to have been genuinely redeemed. They just needed their money back. A year later, I was invited to speak at the dedication ceremony for the Amanda Foster Financial Crime Victim Resource Center, funded by the Restitution Fund and housed at the University of Texas Law School. Standing at the podium, I looked out at an audience that included dozens of financial crime victims, law enforcement officials, and legal professionals. Amanda Foster's story is not a redemption story, I began. She was not a good person who made mistakes. She was someone who spent most of her life choosing to hurt others for personal gain. But Amanda's story is proof that even the worst choices can ultimately lead to justice if the right people respond with courage and intelligence. When Amanda sent me those vacation photos 8 years ago, she set in motion events that exposed a criminal network, recovered millions of stolen dollars, prevented future murders, and created resources that will help financial crime victims for generations. She didn't intend to create any of those positive outcomes. She was trying to save her own life. But intentions matter less than results. And the results of Amanda's final choices have been overwhelmingly positive for people who needed help. After the ceremony, I was approached by a young woman who introduced herself as Emma Rodriguez, the daughter of the private investigator David had murdered. Mrs. Torres, I wanted to thank you. If you hadn't responded to those photos the way you did, David would never have been charged with my father's murder. Emma, I'm so sorry for your loss. My father spent his last months investigating financial crimes because he believed people deserved justice. He would have been proud to know that his death ultimately led to the exposure of so many other crimes. Emma handed me a photo of her father. He always said that justice was like a river, it might take unexpected paths, but it always finds a way to flow toward the sea. That evening, as Michael and I walked through our neighborhood, I reflected on the strange journey that had begun with 4 accidentally sent photos. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Amanda had chosen a different path? Michael asked. You mean if she hadn't sent me the photos? If she had just been honest from the beginning. If she had reported David's crimes to the FBI instead of participating in them. I thought about it. A lot of people would have been hurt less. But David might never have been charged with murder. The criminal network might never have been exposed. So Amanda's bad choices led to better outcomes than her good choices might have. Sometimes justice requires complicated paths. We walked in comfortable silence for several blocks, passing houses where families were settling in for quiet evenings, unaware of the criminal investigations and victim advocacy work that helped keep their world safer. Michael, can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Of course. Sometimes I'm grateful that Amanda sent me those photos. Grateful? If she hadn't, I might have spent years more married to a man who was not just cheating on me but stealing from vulnerable people and committing murder. I might have unknowingly become an accessory to his crimes. You might have become one of his victims. Exactly. Amanda's mistake saved my life in ways I didn't understand for years. We reached our front porch, where the lights Michael had installed cast a warm glow over the garden I'd planted with flowers that bloomed in every season. Kelly, do you think you would have figured out David's deception eventually? I don't know. He was very good at lying, and I was very good at trusting. It might have taken years. And by then, David might have eliminated me the same way he eliminated the private investigator. Standing in front of the home we'd built together, surrounded by the life we'd chosen, I realized that Amanda Foster's legacy was more complex than simple redemption or condemnation. She had been a criminal who had hurt many people. But her final acts had prevented greater crimes and helped more victims than most law-abiding citizens ever helped. Her big mistake hadn't been sending those photos to the wrong person. Her big mistake had been waiting so long to choose justice over self-preservation, but in the end, she had made that choice, and because of that choice, David Patterson was in prison for life. A criminal network had been dismantled, millions of dollars had been returned to victims, and I was standing in my garden with a man who loved me honestly. Planning a future built on truth rather than deception. Sometimes the worst people make the most important contributions to justice, sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the best outcomes, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, other people's poor choices create opportunities for you to make better ones. As Michael and I went inside to call Sophia and check on her work with the Victim Fund, I carried with me a sense of completion I'd never expected to feel. The woman who had once stirred pasta sauce while her world collapsed had built something better from the ruins, and Amanda Foster, criminal and manipulator and accidental agent of justice, had finally done something worth remembering, not because she deserved forgiveness, but because even the worst choices can lead to the right outcomes when the right people respond with courage, intelligence, and an unwavering commitment to protecting others. That was the lesson Amanda's big mistake had ultimately taught me, and it was a lesson I would carry forward for the rest of my life. The end.